As the U.S.-China rivalry escalates, the real danger isn't Beijing's rise, but Washington's internal unraveling. America's debt is spiraling, inflation looms, and political dysfunction has left the country unable to respond strategically. Meanwhile, its old tools, tariffs, sanctions, tech bans, are backfiring.
The dollar is falling. The empire is fading. But your voice is rising. Don't just watch history happen. Be part of it. Why'd have you checkmark subscribe to this channel for more fearless analysis from Richard Wolff and voices the mainstream media refuses to platform?
Straining alliances and destabilizing the very order the U.S. seeks to protect. Just like it did with Japan in the 1980s, the U.S. is leaning hard on economic containment. But history shows that this strategy rarely ends in clear victory. Instead, it triggers stagnation, overreach, or worse. Richard Wolff dissects why this confrontation with China is less about clashing ideologies and more about a high-stakes endurance test. China faces its own internal crises, slowing growth, demographic decline. But so does the U.S., and it's this shared fragility that raises the stakes. The race won't be won through military strength or global sanctions, but through internal resilience, stable governance, economic reform, and social cohesion. This isn't a Cold War repeat. It's a slow, grinding struggle for relevance in a multipolar world, where collapse from within could be more catastrophic than any enemy abroad. Brace yourself, because something big is about to hit the United States. But it's not a missile, it's not a foreign invasion, and it's not even a stock market crash. It's something slower, deeper, and far more dangerous, a long-term geopolitical and economic confrontation that the country is dangerously unprepared to endure. The U.S.-China rivalry is no longer a talking point. It's not a future concern. It's already here, and it's changing the shape of the world as we know it. Let's stop pretending this is about ideology. It's not democracy versus communism. It's not freedom versus authoritarianism. What's unfolding is a structural power struggle, plain and simple. This is about who gets to shape the rules of the global economy, who gets to dominate trade, technology, finance, and diplomacy. And both the United States and China are locked in a high-stakes contest to protect or upend that order. But here's the truth no one in Washington wants to admit. The threat isn't coming from outside. It's coming from within. Both superpowers are fighting this contest while carrying enormous internal weaknesses. In China, there's an economic crisis brewing just beneath the surface. Growth is slowing. Debt is piling up. Youth unemployment is rising. And the country is facing a demographic cliff. Decades of one-child policy have left China aging faster than any industrialized nation in history. And with fewer workers, a shrinking consumer base, and rising social costs, the long-term viability of the Chinese economic model is under real strain. But the United States is not in a position to gloat, not even close. America is politically paralyzed. Polarization has reached levels that make bipartisan governance almost impossible. Congress is gridlocked. Misinformation is rampant. And every election feels like an existential crisis. On top of that, the national debt has exploded to unprecedented levels. Interest payments alone are consuming more and more of the federal budget, and any spike in inflation or interest rates could trigger a fiscal crisis that makes the 2008 crash look like a speed bump. This is a real danger. Two giants, both wounded, circling each other in a global arena neither can afford to dominate alone. It's not a battle for victory. It's a battle for survival. And it's not going to be short. It's going to be a prolonged endurance test that comes down to who can maintain internal resilience, economic stability, and social cohesion over the long haul. The U.S. has already started falling back on an old playbook: containment. We've seen this strategy before. In the 1980s, the U.S. reacted to Japan's economic rise with the Plaza Accord, a move that artificially weakened the dollar to give American exports a competitive edge. Japan's economy never fully recovered. That same instinct is alive and well in today's policies toward China. Tariffs, export restrictions, tech bans, each one designed to slow China's rise, not through competition, but through constraint. The so-called chip war is the clearest example. Washington has moved aggressively to cut China off from the advanced semiconductors and fabrication equipment that power everything from smartphones to AI. The goal is simple: keep China locked into a lower technological tier. But the cost is high. These restrictions disrupt global supply chains, hit American companies that rely on Chinese markets, and inject long-term inflationary pressure into industries that were already fragile after the pandemic. Then there's the dollar. For decades, the U.S. dollar has been the unchallenged global reserve currency. That dominance gave Washington immense power, especially through financial sanctions and the ability to control access to the global banking system. But that weapon has been overused. From Iran to Russia to China, countries are actively working to reduce their reliance on the dollar. They're building alternative payment systems, conducting bilateral trade in local currencies, and diversifying their foreign reserves. This shift isn't theoretical. It's happening, and it poses a fundamental threat to America's economic leverage. If the dollar's dominance erodes, so does the U.S. ability to finance massive deficits cheaply. That means higher borrowing costs, increased inflation risk, and reduced global influence. It also means that financial sanctions, one of Washington's most powerful tools, start losing their bite. The U.S.-China rivalry is already reshaping the global order. The world that emerged after the Cold War, a unipolar system with the U.S. at the top, is gone. What we're seeing now is the rise of multipolarity. China, India, Russia, the EU, even regional coalitions in the Middle East and Southeast Asia are asserting more autonomy. They're refusing to pick sides. They're negotiating on their terms. And that means the U.S. can no longer dictate outcomes through unilateral action. This isn't just a diplomatic challenge. It's a structural transformation. Washington's playbook of sanctions, military presence, and trade controls isn't designed for a world where power is distributed among many players. And if the U.S. doesn't adapt, it risks overextending itself in a futile attempt to preserve dominance instead of building sustainable influence. There's also the domestic cost. Tariffs sound tough. Tech restrictions make headlines, but they have consequences. Tariffs increase consumer prices. Supply chain disruptions fuel inflation. And when inflation runs hot, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, which sends debt service costs skyrocketing. With over $30 trillion in national debt, the U.S. is already on the edge. Any sustained inflation or fiscal shock could tip the economy into crisis. And yet, the confrontation keeps escalating. Why? Because politicians in both countries see strength in confrontation. Because headlines about standing up to China sell better than policies that promote long-term resilience. Because it's easier to blame an external enemy than to confront internal decay. But make no mistake, the real battlefield is at home. The outcome of this rivalry won't be decided in the South China Sea or through chip bans. It will be decided by which nation can stabilize its economy, manage its political divisions, and build institutions that can absorb shocks. And right now, both nations are struggling to do that. The U.S. faces a choice. Continue chasing global dominance through confrontation or turn inward and focus on what truly matters. Rebuilding infrastructure, investing in education and innovation, reducing inequality, restoring political functionality, and managing its fiscal trajectory. None of those goals make for dramatic headlines, but they are the foundation of real power. Because the truth is, this is not a winnable war. There will be no clear winner. The contest is about outlasting, not defeating. And a country that collapses from within first will be the one that loses, no matter how many sanctions, tariffs, or alliances it puts in place. This is not a call for isolationism. It's a call for internal strength, for realism, for strategic maturity. The U.S. cannot afford to be distracted by the illusion of dominance. It needs to be obsessed with resilience. China will continue to challenge American influence. That is a fact. But China is also deeply vulnerable. Its demographic future is bleak. Its economic model is strained. And its centralized political structure makes it brittle in times of crisis. It has major problems, just like the U.S. So the answer isn't confrontation at all costs. The answer is staying intact long enough to watch your rival trip over their own contradictions. The next few decades won't be about superpower triumph. They'll be about superpower survival. And the question now, the urgent question, is whether America can survive itself. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and share this video with someone who still believes this rivalry can be won with bravado. The future will be shaped by resilience, not rhetoric. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. The fact that this whole contest between the United States and China isn't leading to victory. It's leading to exhaustion. Two giants staggering around the ring, each bruised, each bleeding, each unsure whether they're still standing on solid ground. And yet both are too proud, too entrenched, too politically locked in to step back. This isn't about winning anymore. It's about who breaks first. And here's the hard truth. Internal collapse always happens faster than external conquest. Superpowers don't usually die from war. They die from within. And right now, both China and the U.S. are staring down crises that could rupture their foundations. Let's start with China. Everyone's heard about the economic miracle. The rise from poverty to powerhouse. The skyscrapers, the tech dominance, the Belt and Road. But dig just a little beneath the surface, and you'll find a ticking clock. A demographic time bomb. To be exact, thanks to decades of population control policies, China is now aging faster than any country that has ever tried to industrialize. Their workforce is shrinking. Their birth rate is collapsing. That means fewer workers, fewer consumers, and a heavier burden on the state to support an aging population. Add to that the housing bubble, a real estate sector bloated by years of speculative investment, now teetering on collapse. Local governments are buried in debt. Youth unemployment is surging. Growth is slowing. And all of this is happening in an economy still tightly controlled by the Communist Party, where failure isn't acknowledged, it's buried. China's long-term strength is not inevitable. It's vulnerable, deeply, but that doesn't make the U.S. stronger by default. Because while Beijing struggles to hold its centralized model together, Washington is busy lighting its own institutions on fire. In America, the political system is in chaos. One party barely functions. The other is tearing itself apart. Misinformation spreads faster than facts. Every election is now a fight over legitimacy. And compromise? That's dead. The U.S. can't even pass a budget without triggering a near default. And the deeper the polarization, the harder it becomes to address the core issues facing the country. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, inequality, climate, and yes, fiscal responsibility. But here's what makes it even worse. The debt. The United States is carrying a national debt of over $30 trillion and climbing. And that would be dangerous in any scenario. But in this one, with structural inflation rearing its head and interest rates on the rise, it's a powder keg. Every point increase in rates means hundreds of billions more in debt servicing costs. That means less room for investment, less room for stimulus, less flexibility in a crisis. The economic headroom that the U.S. has taken for granted for decades is narrowing and fast. And unlike in previous decades, the global financial system isn't as eager to play along. Countries are starting to question the wisdom of keeping all their reserves in dollars. They're building alternative payment systems, signing local currency agreements, preparing for a future where the greenback doesn't rule every deal. That's not just a monetary story. That's a strategic loss. Because the power of the dollar has always been more than just economic. It's geopolitical. The ability to sanction, to pressure, to isolate, that all comes from financial supremacy. If that fades, America's global leverage goes with it. And it's already happening. In country after country, the response to American sanctions isn't fear, it's diversification. The world is adapting. And the U.S.? It's doubling down on the very tools that are losing effectiveness. Now, let's be clear, none of this means the U.S. is done or China is rising unstoppable. That's not the story here. The story is that both powers are in trouble, and the side that stabilizes first, that strengthens within, will define the century, not through dominance, but through survival. That's why this entire obsession with winning the U.S.-China rivalry is missing the point. There will be no winner. There will only be nations that adapt, and nations that fall apart trying to hold on to a world that no longer exists. The Cold War analogy doesn't work here. This isn't a clean battle between ideologies, between two distinct blocks with clearly drawn lines. This is a messy, integrated, interdependent competition between two countries that share trade, investment, technology, and even culture. Cutting that connection cleanly would cause more damage than any confrontation ever could. And yet, both governments keep ratcheting it up. Tariffs, tech bans, diplomatic escalations, military posturing. The U.S. restricts chip exports, cuts off Huawei, slaps sanctions on Chinese firms. China responds with rare earth threats, state subsidies, and quiet retaliation through its own trade networks. But the more they escalate, the more fragile the entire global system becomes. Supply chains get rewired, yes, but not smoothly. The transition costs are massive. Inflation gets baked into everything: consumer goods, energy, food. Central banks try to contain it, but they're caught between stopping inflation and avoiding recession. That's not a choice. That's a trap, and there's no exit ramp in sight. Because even the idea of diplomacy has been poisoned. In the current climate, even talking to the other side is seen as weakness. The political incentives in both countries reward escalation, not resolution. So the pressure keeps building. And the public? They're left paying higher prices, losing jobs, watching their countries drift further away from stability and closer to the edge. That's why the biggest threat to the U.S. right now isn't China at all. It's overextension. It's the belief that America can contain a rising power, manage global military commitments, stabilize the economy, and fix its domestic crises all at once. It can't. No nation can. Not indefinitely. Great powers don't collapse from foreign invasion. They collapse from within, when they refuse to adapt, when they mistake inertia for strength, and when they think endless confrontation is a substitute for resilience. This rivalry is a warning, not just about global competition, but about national priorities. If the U.S. keeps pouring its energy into trying to suppress external threats while ignoring internal decay, the collapse won't be sudden. It'll be slow, painful, and entirely self-inflicted. The future won't be shaped by which superpower can shout the loudest, sanction the fastest, or deploy the most carrier groups. It will be shaped by which can stay coherent, functional, and economically stable when the next shock hits. That's the contest. That's the war. And that's what's about to hit the U.S., not with a bang, but with wave after wave of economic pressure, institutional strain, and geopolitical fatigue. The question now is whether anyone in power will stop posturing long enough to see it. Because if they don't, it won't be China that brings down American dominance. It'll be America itself. This is the inflection point. Right here. Right now. And the worst mistake the United States can make is pretending it still has time. Because the clock is ticking. Not toward a grand showdown, but toward a slow-motion breakdown that no one seems willing to name out loud. The signs are everywhere. You've got record debt piling up like sandbags before a flood. A Congress that can barely function. A public so politically divided that even the concept of truth is under attack. A media environment that rewards outrage over substance. And leadership, on both sides of the aisle, more interested in scoring points than solving problems. Now add a global contest with China into that chaos. And what do you get? A recipe for disaster. Because here's the brutal reality. The U.S. cannot afford another foreign policy obsession if it can't fix what's broken at home. The bridges are crumbling. Schools are underfunded. Healthcare is still a mess. Wages are stagnant. Life expectancy is declining. And yet, billions are being funneled into new Cold War strategies while the foundations of the country rot from neglect. Meanwhile, China is playing a long game. Yes, it has serious internal problems. Yes, it's facing demographic and economic crises that could undermine its future. But it's not wasting time pretending to be the world's moral compass. It's building infrastructure, buying influence, expanding partnerships in Asia, Africa, Latin America, filling the gaps America left behind. This isn't about ideology. It's about endurance, about which system breaks down first. And the only way the U.S. survives this is by turning inward, not with isolationism, but with purpose. That means rebuilding things that actually make a country strong. Functioning institutions, an educated workforce, affordable health care, clean energy, responsible fiscal policy, and a political system that doesn't teeter on collapse every 2 years. The myth that America can do everything, be everywhere, and contain every rival is dying. The world is moving into a multipolar era, whether Washington likes it or not. That doesn't mean the U.S. is finished. But it does mean that power, real, sustainable power, won't come from dominance anymore. It will come from resilience. So yes, brace yourself. Because something big is already underway. It's not a war you'll see on a battlefield. It's not a treaty headline or a market crash. It's a long, grinding shift in global power. And the only way through it is with clarity, courage, and a total recalibration of what strength actually looks like. If you're ready to move past the noise, if you believe real strength starts at home, subscribe, comment, share. Let's start the conversation this country is too scared to have before it's too late.